The Russian T-64 tank was the first main battle tank in the USSR for which a shell-loading mechanism was invented. This made it possible to reduce the size of the vehicle by eliminating the fourth crew member, the loader. Since then, for more than half a century, Russians still make small tanks with autoloaders. But what did the Western armies do in response? To give an answer to the Russians, they went the way of creating giant tanks. What's the point here? What did the Eastern Bloc count on? Creating small tanks? And what tactics did the Western Bloc choose, emphasizing the production of large tanks? So, in 1962, a major revision of strategic military plans began. It became clear the number of nuclear weapons on both sides is so large that in case of a real war, there would be just no winners. This meant that the emphasis had to be on less destructive weapons that would win the war without wiping out the whole planet. Thus, the Soviet Union began to build a new doctrine based on three key points: preemptive strike, lightning-fast attack, and rapid advance deep into NATO positions. To achieve this, the Soviets prioritized developing airborne troops, providing them with more effective vehicles that were mobile and suitable for rapid deployment deep inside the combat zone. In 1976, for the first time in world history, they landed a heavy combat vehicle, the BMD-1, from an airplane, with the crew inside. And, of course, considering the new doctrine, they began to develop the mainland forces. Soviet doctrine, as we all know, pretty much went all in on numerical advantage. As Joseph Stalin said, quantity has its own quality. While the Germans in the Second World War were focused on creating the perfect tank with the perfect welds, crew, and tracks, the Soviets realized they could essentially bodge their tanks to last just as long as they were needed and, well, make loads of them. Your German tank may look very cool with a big gun and thick armor, but the logistics behind it are caput, transmission issues and all. Being able to take out 10 T-34s for every one of your own tanks is all well and good until your own tanks come across 11 hostile tanks. You get the idea, and so did the Soviets. So, they kept this idea, and it's reflected in the T-55 and T-72, and so on. Thus, in 1963, the T-64 main battle tank appeared, marking the first time the crew consisted of 3 people instead of 4. The fourth crew member, the loader, was replaced by a loading mechanism. This innovation reduced the size and weight of the tank, making it faster and more maneuverable. Following the T-64, the T-72 and T-90 tanks emerged, and a special, high-speed tank, the T-80, powered by a gas turbine engine, was developed and labeled the breakthrough tank. Despite consuming a significant amount of fuel, it could be quickly started even in the coldest weather and deployed towards the western borders. But let's get back to the automatic loader. Do not think that the Soviets invented it and installed it on their tanks only to save weight and increase speed. There is another reason, which few people know about. The fact is that the Soviets planned to use their troops in radiation-contaminated terrain. See, in addition to strategic nuclear weapons, there are tactical nukes. Their tactics were as follows. To quickly break through the Western defenses, tactical nuclear missiles were planned to be used. One strike would cover an area of about 4 square kilometers. Then, a Soviet tank battalion should enter the resulting defense gap and collapse the front line. But since this entire area will be contaminated with radiation, the Soviets need the tank crews to hold out as long as possible. And as we know, radiation is most damaging to those soldiers who bear the most physical strain. In a tank, that's the loader. That's why he was replaced by a loading mechanism. In addition, the military doctrine of the USSR assumed that the Soviet troops should move as quickly as possible to the positions of enemy armies and intermingle with them. This strategic approach would force NATO commanders into a difficult choice: accept defeat or sacrifice their own troops by using nuclear weapons. But even in this case, they would still be defeated by the Soviet troops of the second or third wave. It's hard to call such tactics humane even to your own soldiers. Although these tactics may not be considered humane even to one's own soldiers, it reflected the strategy the Soviets were counting on, contrasting with the military doctrine of other nations. Let's take a look at all modern Western tanks. Abrams, Challenger, Leclerc, Leopard, all of them are characterized by their huge size compared to Russian tanks. It would seem that this is a bad thing, right? Tanks will be slow, and besides, they are easier to hit. In fact, this is absolutely not the case. They have a number of great advantages over Soviet and Russian tank designs. First, there is very little space in the Russian T-72 or T-90. The crew experiences more discomfort and gets tired more quickly. Moreover, the small interior space means that if a shape-charged munition hits the tank, the probability of burning the vehicle and everyone inside is much higher. It is very difficult to install modern electronics and optics in Russian tanks. There is simply not enough space for them. Fire control systems, night vision, thermal imagers, battlefield communications, all these things make Russian tankers sad. Their loading mechanism has huge flaws as well. First of all, it has a carousel-shaped design. This does not allow using longer, more powerful ammunition. The mechanism simply will not accommodate them. The carousel shape of the autoloader makes Russian tanks unsafe. It is technically impossible to separate the shells inside it from the crew by any protective layer. Even if, by some miracle, the loading mechanism in the T-72 could be separated from the crew, it would make no difference. This mechanism holds only 22 shells, and another 22 shells are located in the tank without any protection. This causes the Russian tank to simply explode when being hit, and its turret to fly off, like a beer bottle cap. In turn, the doctrine of the Western Bloc is built on completely different principles. Realizing that the Russians were making large numbers of cheap and fast breakthrough tanks, the NATO countries responded by creating big hunter tanks. These have stronger armor, offer superior protection and crew survivability, and have much better range and visibility than Soviet tanks. Western tanks are designed so that one Abrams or Leopard can destroy 5 to 7 T-72 or T-90 tanks, and from a long distance to prevent them from getting too close. The differences between the two weapon schools still remain, but even now we can see they're mixing. For example, the French tank AMX 56 Leclerc already has an autoloader, not of the carousel, but of the rectangular type. The new American Abrams X tank and the German KF-51 Panther will also be equipped with autoloaders, and the shells in them will be separated from the crew. In terms of weight and dimensions, they are likely to be smaller than today's Abrams M1 and Leopard 2. In turn, the newest Russian T-14 Armata was designed bigger to modernize the systems and eliminate lots of flaws their previous tanks had. Isn't it interesting? How different ways did the Eastern and the Western Bloc tanks go, and how they are starting to obtain similar qualities now? I guess it is.